So, Rahul, thank you once again for joining us at the Digital Onboarding Summit. I think it's a real pleasure to kind of have you on this session. And I think what would be great is if you could just start with a quick introduction about yourself and AB InBev and kind of what your role is over there. That would be super.
Sure. Thanks, Kiran. So I'm part of AB InBev's captive operation in India. We're called the Global Capability Center. We manage about 1,300 employees. We provide services to almost all regions of AB InBev, primarily financial services.
Okay.
We've got an IT unit. We've got analytics. We've got compliance.
Right.
Functions that support multiple businesses from here.
Okay.
So I had a function called People Continuity. So as part of continuity, I have talent management under me. I have projects, I have transformation initiatives, and internal communications.
Okay. That's a pretty big portfolio.
It is.
Yeah.
We're the global, we're the largest beer maker in the world. We're the largest beer in the world. We've got over 500 brands. The most popular of them being Budweiser, Stella Artois, and Corona, which you've heard of.
Sure, of course.
Which makes us an interesting company to work for.
I guess most of the beers anyone drinks.
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah, super. So I think in this session, what we wanted to kind of cover is AB InBev India and GCC actually had been through a pretty major event last year, which was, a build, operate, transfer kind of model that happened. And so in particular, what we're really interested in kind of talking about is some of the learnings from that whole process. Anyone who's looking to get some knowledge and some perspective on what it means for a company who's going through a similar process, an event like a build, operate, transfer, potentially a combination of two different entities coming together. I guess the onboarding, the culture fit, the even the manual paperwork, all of those are big kind of processes, which happen all of a sudden in one go, rather than just a yearly kind of, onboarding or ramp up or any of that, right? It's just one event. So what I would love to kind of start with is in that sort of an event, what do you think is the role of onboarding from an employee life cycle perspective? What do you think is where's the importance from an onboarding perspective in such an event?
Okay. So if I have to step back a bit, I think the biggest thing that we did was keeping employees informed. So communication is key. We started our communications 5 to 6 months at least before the transition happened.
Okay.
We had a large population that we were transitioning, over 800, close to 850 people.
Wow. Yeah.
From a culture perspective, there are a lot of things that make us unique. So it was always a communication of what we mean, and we mean what we say. So that was very important for employees to see. It's all very easy to talk about when you get them into a town hall or a meeting room and talk to them about what we are as a company. But they actually, when they see you walking the talk, that's when they really imbibe that new culture that they're going to get into. So from an onboarding perspective, I think the way we looked at it was we understood that is going to be the first touch point, the first official touch point, where they get to see how AB InBev works as a company in terms of the processes we have, in terms of the technology we use, in terms of the ease of use.
Right.
So we had all these elements coming into play, and we wanted it to be a smooth operation because when on D-Day, our measure of success was no disruption in operation. So if you were doing something on a Wednesday and D-Day was on a Thursday, on day one, there was no disruption. They come into work, they're able to do everything that they were able to do a day before,
Got it.
continue that way. So that is one of our biggest challenges, getting people onboarded, getting accesses in place,
Right.
rolling out policies and things of that sort. In addition, the other big thing from a statutory perspective was getting their documents in place.
Okay.
How do you handle documentation from 800 people overnight? So as a company, the GCC in India, we grew from about 190 employees to over 1,000
Wow.
over hours. So that was what systems showed.
Right.
So onboarding for us was important because it had to communicate the message that we were talking about all along.
Sure.
In addition, we had leaders who wanted to welcome the people coming into the organization, different leaders across the world. We needed to get that message across.
Right.
So that's where Tidy came in handy, where everyone was on Tidy on day one, day -1 actually.
Right.
So they could actually have those messages being sent to their mailboxes.
Mm-hmm.
And they could go and look at things as they were happening.
Mm-hmm.
So onboarding played a very important role. We got very good feedback from employees in terms of them being able to use the system, being able to not being hassled with paperwork. Of course, there was some paperwork that had to be done, but that was very minimal in terms of what actually needed a wet signature had to be on paper. Otherwise, everything else was on, was online. We had partners, in addition to you guys who helped us, who seamlessly got the data. It went to places where it had to. Systems got updated. So I think that initial touch point was very important from an onboarding perspective, and we still believe that that's what the employee sees when they either accept your offer or whether it's a BOT model. That first step, you get one chance to make a first impression.
Sure.
That's where onboarding comes into play.
Got it. So from this, from the perspective of transitioning employees into your organization overnight, versus lateral hires and general hiring that happens. Now, what are some of the key differences that we should probably keep in mind when it comes to onboarding these two different types of people that are joining your company? So especially when you're talking about a build, operate, transfer model, it's probably a scenario that even those who are going through an M&A event will probably kind of face, right? Overnight, one company has to kind of understand the culture and understand the various elements of who they're joining. So what are some of the most important things you guys found out should be a part of that sort of onboarding?
Okay, so planning is key. I think it's very important to understand the risks, understand the downstream impacts of whatever you do.
Sure.
So getting teams set up much before the actual date of position, and assigning responsibilities, people understanding what roles they have, that is key. Leadership buy-in is critical.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, while business takes care of redundancies and transfers or transformations that need to happen, while IT takes care of accesses, the key is is still going to be what people feel about the whole thing. So,
sure.
So we spent 6 months, like I said, talking to people, letting them know what's happening, and it could all have gone down the drain if we hadn't got our onboarding right.
Sure.
So it's key to collaborate with stakeholders. It's key to identify risks much before the actual day, knowing that there's definitely going to be something that will happen on day one. You're just trying to minimize risk there is a lot, and just playing out scenarios. Have mock sessions where you try and figure what could go wrong, trying to identify what could go wrong, and just having backups in place, something that happens.
Got it.
A couple of such instances where some IT systems think properly, or we had problems with printers, but we had backups ready and available.
Sure.
So key planning is key. Identifying stakeholders, assigning responsibilities early on in the process is super critical.
Okay.
Question that you talked about, where how is this different? How is an M&A piece different, or a large movement different from lateral hiring? The advantages or that work for you when you're looking at larger groups migrating is you have time to communicate,
Sure.
time to understand the risks with the larger group. When you're doing lateral hiring, it's happening ad hoc, which means you have to have a set process in place.
Got it.
You have to have everything in place, and whenever the ad hoc piece happens, you trigger an alert and your process takes over.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. So, in terms of communication, is it right to say that in an event like this, maybe over communication is always a better thing than, trying to. How did you all manage it? Was over communication part of your plan? Was there more town halls in that 6-month planning period? What was the kind of thought process from that perspective?
Well, I think over communication helps in this case. There's a difference between over communication and too much communication, I think.
Sure.
Over communication, again, depends on how you want to communicate the idea. What do you want to talk about at different stages?
Right.
Again, if you plan that out well, if you have help at hand. So while you may get people into a town hall, into large meeting halls and talk about things, there are always going to be questions that come up after the meeting, or there could be questions that individuals may not be comfortable asking.
Sure.
So setting up various modes of two-way communication. So we had help desks set up for more than 2 weeks, close to about a month actually, talking about anything.
Wow.
Employees could come and talk to people.
Like actual physical help desks.
Yes, physical
Wow.
help desk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, like I said, so we had different lines of communication open. We had email.
Right.
Leaders were very accessible, and that's something that was reinforced. So if you look at our space here, typical open culture,
Sure.
no, there's no concept of a cabin.
Right.
So you can just walk up to someone in the leadership team and talk to them if you want to do, and that's how it is globally as well.
Sure.
The idea was adding the human element there, because there are always going to be people who are more comfortable doing a one-on-one with you, and then collating that information on a frequent basis to say that, hey, this is what we're hearing a lot about. Maybe we need to do a better job of communicating certain parts of it. So it was a learning for us as well. But we had different modes of communication and always try to keep that two-way.
Got it. And so what were some of the kind of points you were taking back from a results perspective to see whether something was going right or something was going wrong? Even during that whole planning period, speaking to multiple stakeholders, maybe 10 days before D-Day, what were some of the things that you were tracking, which could give you a sense of whether things were going okay, great, or not so great?
Okay. So there were processes, of course, multiple tracking. There were processes which needed to go live at a certain date.
Sure.
From a management perspective, just tracking those. From an employee experience point of view, basically ears to the ground. What were we hearing people talking about? What was the pulse of people?
Sure.
Randomly talking to people, having smaller sessions, just making sure that they understood what was happening, questions that they had, concerns that came up. We were picking it from multiple places. From, like I said, from a process point of view, it's all that's supposed to happen in a certain way. So, for example, if IT needs to have something ready by a certain date, then those were coming in very systematically. The softer aspects of it was what we had a much wider net cast.
Sure.
You have multiple touch points.
Right.
There were people from our HR team or the provider's HR team. We try and met up very frequently. And collected information, acted upon it very quickly. Kept the leadership informed that these are some of the concerns that are coming, because at the end of the day, it's a shared responsibility. It's not just the HR team or what we call the people team here. Some of the people team's sole responsibility to talk to employees.
Right.
And that's reinforced in our culture as well, that as a leader, responsible for your people.
Got it.
leadership was fully involved in this as well when we were addressing any people concern.
Got it. And so AB InBev is a pretty large global organization. Was there an impact from a global perspective, even though this was a very local kind of an event that happened? What was some of the kind of interactions from a global scale perspective? Because again, y'all are in the hundreds of thousands employees, I think, globally. So how would you communicate that to your existing, workforce as well when an event like this happens?
Yeah. So while we're a small part in the larger global picture,
Sure.
among capability centers, we're the largest one in ABI.
Got it.
There is a lot of focus even now in terms of our capabilities, in terms of what we're able to deliver. So a lot of good things happening at that time. A lot of leadership looking at us, right at the CXO level,
Sure.
in terms of how this would turn out. So a lot of live sessions with senior leaders. We had a lot of senior leaders come down as well for D-Day when it happened.
Sure.
And, a lot of videos came through as well. So they were playing, those were being shared with employees. I think in the run-up to the day, and even a few weeks after that, a lot of senior leadership in different businesses came down to employees as well. So there was a lot of focus globally on pulling this off and making sure that, of course, there are no disruptions.
Sure.
Just welcoming those people in, because this center had shown what they're capable of doing,
right?
And which is why leadership was so focused on this event that happened. So, in terms of content, in terms of messaging that went out, I think we definitely did a lot.
Okay.
Different leaders from different businesses globally, and vice presidents and above. We had all of them congratulating us, talking to us about what it means to them, their businesses as well. So yeah, a lot of interaction with senior leadership,
and a lot of visibility, right, from a global perspective.
A lot of visibility, yes.
Yeah. So did you all actually create, campaigns or communication campaigns for internal AB InBev employees globally as well?
Yes. So, so while all this was happening with a significantly large group of employees, the existing employees were kept in the loop as well in terms of what's happening. How are things changing, how it's going to affect them, and being a smaller group, about close to 200 people,
right?
It was easier to communicate because one office and another smaller office.
Right.
So communication wasn't a problem. Of course, as and when we were communicating to the larger group, we were also communicating to legacy employees to let them know what.
Sure.
I think everyone knew at the end of it, what multiple town halls leading up to the event in the last month and a half as well.
Got it. Okay. And so what were some of the metrics you all had to decide whether this was a successful transition? What were the metrics from an onboarding perspective? What should someone be looking for to understand whether the transition was successful?
Mm-hmm. So I'll talk. So like I said, from a system perspective, did things work okay or not? Was it business as usual on day one or day zero? Those went off fairly successfully. I think we had major issues there. From a people front, of course, we had surveys that went out, multiple times in the weeks following the launch, just to make sure that are people comfortable? Have they got accesses? Do they know where they're sitting? Do they know their team members?
Right.
Do they know the benefits that we offer? So multiple, short survey questionnaires that went out to collect responses. But at the same time, we continued with our, human factor, just making sure that the people business partners were also there on the ground, talking to employees, and ensuring that the overall experience was good. So from a metrics perspective, I think a lot of employee satisfaction surveys that we picked up. We also got some in terms of what may not have gone very well, and we were able to quickly action on those. And most of this was probably things that we could have planned better, but probably circumstances as well.
Sure. And I'm sure you'll never get to a situation where 100% is, hunky dory and there's no problems ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, yeah. So, how long was this onboarding for your, for the employees who moved over overnight? How long did you think that program should run? And were there kind of checkpoints after that, to make sure that still everything is running smooth, or was it just a one effort which lasted an X amount of time?
So we had a very specific objective when onboarding these people, the 800 odd people that we onboarded. The intent was, of course, business as usual, welcoming them to ABI, talking to them about what our culture is, what we expect of them, how ABI operates,
right,
which is quite different from most organizations, given that we're a very aggressive FMCG company,
sure,
profitable FMCG companies in the world, which means it translates to some of the culture that we have in the company as well. So talking about communicating about it. So we looked at a 30 to 45 day period for these.
Okay.
Because after that, the business partners took over, have integrated them into what our annual people process or people cycle, we call it is. They're going to have to get their targets in place. When performance reviews happen, when you have your bonus being paid out. So that's part of the normal routine that any employee would go through.
Sure.
But we wanted this to be a very concise period where we'd share specific information that we wanted them to know about. Compared to what we have from the lateral hiring perspective, the lateral hiring part for onboarding goes on for almost 6 months.
Okay.
Where we have communications going out to employees, business partners, managers at points in time, just getting them into the system.
Sure.
Into the system, talking to them about different aspects of our culture, getting them to interact with the system that we have, or with their team members as well. So multiple touch points for lateral hires. For this group of employees, it was very focused to say 30 or 45 days is what we're going to get you on from an on perspective, and post that you'll have business partners taking over all your engagement activities.
Got it. So what would you think are some of the pitfalls or some of the things people should keep an eye out for from your experience?
I think communication is key. Like I've said, try to over communicate if you can. Have a very focused plan in terms of what you want to talk about, when you want to talk about.
Sure.
It's very important for people to know certain things at a certain time. So don't overload. Like when I say communicate, don't overload and communicate. Sure. Understand what's needed at what point in time. That is critical, because you also have to understand that there's a lot of information coming to them from a business perspective as well, which is key for them. So you want to work in sync with the business to say that here's what we think is appropriate to send at what point in time. Now that's absolutely key. Talk to employees. You're doing such a large, transition, whether it's a BOT model, whether it's a merger or whether it's an acquisition. It's important to, have people feel comfortable. That's the biggest key, because there are a lot of uncertainties. Rumors spread very easily.
Sure.
The good way or the bad way. So that's something that you want to get ahead of very quickly. So keep your ears to the ground and, be open in your communications. If there are communications that are not going to be, very easily accepted, get rid of it, be open, communicate to people to say that, this is what it is, but here's what we're going to do about it. So try to think of it from their perspective, but always open communication is your best bet. That will dictate whether you're successful or not.
Got it. And how important of a role is the manager of team in such a transition event? I mean, because fundamentally, I think as people teams or as, even the leadership, you're always a little one step removed, right? The manager who kind of runs the team is probably the person who is going to be required to guide the team as well through such a transition. So,
Right.
in your opinion, what's the role over there, and what can be done from that perspective?
Okay. Um, so I think from the manager, I think is the most critical person in the whole transition piece. So while we talk about leadership, while we talk about
Right.
the HR teams, the project teams, getting things together,
Yeah.
transition to happen on the ground, no one can get as close as the manager can.
Of course. Yeah.
What you've also got to ensure is those managers are empowered to take decisions, to listen to employees, to be able to convey it up the chain, to say that this is something I really believe is an issue. Taking time to understand that that is really an issue. So I think managers are key, because they're the first line of contact that the employee will reach out to.
Sure.
They also have a good sense of what they can handle and what needs to be pushed further up the chain. So I think they're fundamentally the most important cog in the wheel.
Yeah. And so does it mean that it's important for you to kind of run sessions with them, which is
Yes.
very, very specific to their role in the process?
Right. So absolutely, and you touched on an important point, because that's something that we did as well. We had several managers, I think close to about 150 managers.
Wow. Okay.
Extensive sessions with.
Right.
Again, trying to make sure that the messaging was consistent when we were talking to them, because it's very important for them to understand what we're saying so they can disseminate it much more easier. So whether it was your line managers, their managers, function leads, it was important for the same message to cascade down in the same way to every single employee. So it was important for them to say the same thing. We wanted to make sure there was no dissonance there.
Right.
How the messaging was communicated. Concerns that came up were actually valid concerns that we were able to catch much, very early on in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Able to address those. So I think communicating to managers is something we did fairly well, I believe. And that goes on even today. Any communication that needs to go out to employees, first thing we do is talk to the managers, understand concerns. We have actually had cases now where we had to go back and make small tweaks to our programs or policies based on feedback we've got from managers. So yeah, absolutely key in the process.
Okay, super. And so as we kind of probably start wrapping up from a time perspective, one of the questions I had is, if you were to go through this whole process again, what would you do differently?
I think I would have asked for more time. But no, I think it's a learning process. It doesn't matter how many times you do it. I think every process is unique. I think 90% of the work is fairly similar in terms of, if you've done it once before, it could go wrong. But I think every company brings with it its own values, its own quirks.
Sure.
That are specific to a company, even specific to a certain location.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, if I had to do it all over again, I think I wouldn't ask for more time. Of course, I think we better, but I think in terms of understanding the population better, and maybe trying in hindsight, could we have done some things better? Absolutely, but I've been fairly confident that we did a fantastic job in terms of how people came together. And for a lot of people doing it for the first time, I think it was a great experience that they would still cherish. I mean, we still have people talking about it today.
Wow.
The people who were part of the project teams, and it's just that collaboration which was there between teams. So it was so nice to see.
Right.
I think those are experiences that even people who, even the expats who were posted here at that time, got a fantastic experience in terms of how you go about such a large transformation. So, yeah, I think if I had to go back, we'd probably do the same thing all over again.
That's super. That's a great answer. So I think we're just running as per schedule. So I think you have given me a lot of insight into the process, and I think anyone who's listening will also agree that it's a lot of insight and a lot of input. So once again, Rahul, thank you so much for kind of giving us your time and your perspective, and
Thank you.
look forward to continuing to collaborate together.
Sure. Thank you.
Cheers, Rahul. Thank you so much.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.